Let me tell you a story. So it's a story about a strategy, an approach, philosophy, one that I've been thinking a lot about. And it starts with a guy that maybe you haven't heard of. His name's Dave Brailsford. And to set the stage for this, I want to tell you a little bit about British cycling. So about 15 years ago, early 2000s, British cycling hires this guy named Dave Brailsford. And at that point, for the last 100 years, British cycling had been incredibly mediocre. They had won a single gold medal back in 1908. They had never won a Tour de France, which is the premium race in cycling, the premier race. And so they hired this guy named Dave Brailsford to change that. And in fact, at the time, they were so mediocre that when they went to buy a new set of bikes, they were gonna get like 200 from a top manufacturer in Europe. They actually weren't even given quotes from the manufacturer because they didn't want other teams to see the British riders using their gear for fear that it would hurt sales. And so they brought Brailsford in and they said, "What's your plan for changing this?" And he said, "Well, I believe in this philosophy that I call the aggregation of marginal gains." The way that he described it is the 1% improvement in nearly everything that you do. So they started with a bunch of things that you would expect a cycling team to start with. So for example, they put slightly lighter tires on the bike. They got a more ergonomic seat for the riders to sit on. They had their outdoor riders wear indoor racing suits because they were lighter and more aerodynamic. They had each rider wear a biofeedback sensor so they could see how they would respond to training and then adjust it appropriately for the person. But then they did a bunch of things you wouldn't expect a cycling team to do. So they split tested different types of massage gels to see which one led to the best type of muscle recovery. They taught each rider how to wash their hands to reduce the risk of infections. They wouldn't get a cold after, get sick. They also figured out the type of pillow that led to the best night's sleep for each rider and then brought that on the road with them to hotels whenever they were competing. And Brailsford said, if we can actually do this, right, if we can execute all these little 1% improvements, then I think we can win a Tour de France within 5 years. He ended up being wrong. They won it in 2 years, and then they repeated again the third year with a different rider. And then after a 1 year break, they won 2 more. So they've won 4 out of the last 5 now, have gone to British cyclists. But it was at the Olympics in London in 2012 when this kind of strategy really came to fruition. They won 70% of the gold medals available. And so this idea that small improvements, tiny habits, little choices are not just a cherry on top of our performance, not just like a nice thing to have, but actually can be the key that unlocks significant success. That's an idea that I want us to carry with us as we go through the rest of this presentation. And one way to think about it is just kind of basic math. Like if you just look at the numbers, if you were able to improve by 1% each day for an entire year, and those gains compound, you would end up 37 times better at the end of the year. And if you were to get 1% worse, you would whittle yourself almost all the way down to 0. And what's interesting here is that everybody wants a transformation, right? Everybody wants a radical improvement, we want rapid success, but we fail to realize that small habits and little choices are transforming us every day already. That these times when you make a choice that's slightly better, slightly worse, a little mistake or a small error, 1% better or 1% worse, that these things compound over time. And habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. And so if you can learn to master those, then you can make time work for you rather than against you, right? Good habits make time your ally, bad habits make time your enemy. And so throughout the rest of this presentation, I want to talk about how we can do that. Today I'm going to teach you how to build the habits that you need to get the results that you want. And in order to do this, I'm going to take you through a framework for building better habits. And then I'm also going to share a personal example of how I use this. So my writing habit. If you don't know, I write at jamesclear.com. I write about how to build better habits, improve performance, and generally live better. Over 1 million people visit the site each month. There's over 400,000 subscribers on the weekly email newsletter. And it all came out of a simple writing habit. So, for the rest of this talk, there are 4 stages of habit formation. I'm going to take you through each of those 4. All right, so the 4 stages are noticing, wanting, doing, and liking. Noticing, wanting, doing, and liking. You cannot perform a habit or take an action if you do not notice something. I need to see a coffee cup sitting on the side in order to pick it up first. But it's not in my realm of knowledge. If I don't know it exists, I can't do anything about it. But then I need to want it. I need to want to drink coffee and pick it up. If I don't desire it or crave it, then I will not take the action. Then there's doing. You actually do the habit. And then I need to enjoy the reward. I need to enjoy drinking the coffee to repeat it again. So noticing, wanting, doing, and liking. Let's talk about each one. And as we do this, I'm gonna give you a little bit of research about why it works. I'm gonna give you practical action steps, at least one for each, that you can use to implement it in your life. So, one of my favorite things about noticing, one of my favorite strategies for discussing it, it's called implementation intentions. And there are hundreds of studies on this, over 100 studies on implementation intentions, if you feel like geeking out and getting into the research. But if not, I'll just give you the simple version here. So one of my favorite studies is about exercise. And they had 3 cohorts in this study. So they have, first cohort, they said, I just want you to track how often you work out over the next few weeks, right? So that's the standard cohort, the control group. Second group, they said, we want you to track how often you exercise. But we're also gonna give you a motivational speech presentation, talk about the benefits of heart health, why habits are good for you, and so on. So this is the motivated group, all right? The third group, they got the same presentation, so they're equally motivated, and then they did one thing differently. And that one thing was they filled out this sentence. They said, during the next week, I will partake in at least 20 minutes of vigorous exercise on this day, at this time, in this place, right? They specifically stated their intention to implement the behavior, so implementation intention. Here's what happened. First group, 1 out of 3 of them worked out. Second group, motivation did nothing. As soon as they left the researcher's facility the next day, they weren't motivated. It's like reading a book or watching a YouTube or listening to a motivational speaker and then you forget all about it 20 minutes later. But the third group, the group that had a specific plan for how they were gonna implement the behavior, 9 out of 10 of them worked out. So you can increase your odds of success 2 to 3x just by having a specific plan. And this is the insight. Many people think that they lack motivation when what they really lack is clarity. They think that they need to get more motivated, that they need willpower in order to execute on a habit. If I just felt like writing, if I just felt like meditating, if I felt like working out, then I would do it. But in fact, they don't have a plan for it, and so they wake up each day thinking, I wonder if I'll feel motivated to write today. I wonder if I'll feel motivated to work out today. But instead, you can take the decision making out of it by explicitly stating when, where, and how you want to implement the habit. So here's how I did this with my writing habit. I decided that on November 12th, 2012, which was a Monday, if you check, that was going to be the first day that I published an article, and I was going to publish every Monday and every Thursday. That was my implementation intention. That was my specific plan. It didn't matter how good or how bad it was. It didn't matter how long or how short it was. It didn't matter how I felt about it. If all I could do was write 3 good sentences that day, then that was getting published. But I did that, and I did it for 3 years, and that was how the site grew. It was just that core habit that drove the growth. So you need to give your goals a time and a place to live in the world, right? Give them space on your calendar. Now, it sounds easy to say, let's just start a plan, let's write down exactly what you should do, and then maybe you'll follow through on it. But of course, we all know that there are challenges that arise, it's not quite that easy. So here's a little strategy that I like to use to make sure you can come up with a better plan of action, and it's called a failure pre-mortem. So the way that it works is you think about the habit, the project, the goal, whatever the most important thing is that you want to work on, and I want you to imagine, fast forward 6 months from now and you failed. And then tell the story of why you failed. What happened? What challenges did you encounter? What was it that took you off course? When I do this with businesses, sometimes we call it the kill the company exercise, because everybody just sits around and thinks about ways to kill the company in the next 6 months. And once you have all that stuff laid out on the table in front of you, you can start to make better choices about how to develop a plan. You can start to have if-then plans. So not only do I want to exercise for 20 minutes on Monday at 5 p.m., but also if I do not exercise because I have to take my kid to practice or whatever, then Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. I will go in, right? You can have ways to adjust for these challenges. So, core point about noticing is it's hard to change something if you're not aware of it, and one way to become more aware of the opportunity to take action is to have a specific plan for when it's gonna happen. All right, stage 2, wanting. One of the most overlooked drivers of habits and human behavior is our physical environment. So let me tell you a quick story. This comes from Harvard. So these researchers at Harvard went to Massachusetts General Hospital and they had a very interesting question. They wondered if they could change people's behavior without talking to them at all, without giving them anything to do, without trying to motivate them, but how can we shift their behavior without asking them to do anything? And so this is a drawing of the cafeteria at the hospital. This is drawn to scale. The shaded pink boxes are areas where there are refrigerators that have soda in them. The 2 black boxes on the side are water, all right, refrigerators with water, and then all the other tables are food in the cafeteria. Now, they made a few little changes. They turned the pink boxes into ones that also had water. Okay, so they just added, but these refrigerators still have soda available. They just added water to it. And then they had a bunch of those little rolling carts, and they put those around the cafeteria too, so you can switch back and forth and see they just added a couple things. Now, what happened? They didn't talk to anybody, they didn't do anything, but over the next 6 months, people drank 25% more water and 11% less soda. And it's interesting because if you went up and talked to anybody sitting there and you asked them, why are you drinking this? Everybody would have a reason. They'd say, well, I felt like drinking soda, I felt like drinking water. But in fact, many of them chose to drink it simply because they were presented with it. And this is an interesting insight about our desires. Your environment often influences them. We want things simply because they are an option, right? Simply because they are in front of us at the time. You walk into any living room in America, where do all the couches and chairs face? They all look at the TVs. Like, what is that room designed to get you to do? We wonder why we sit and watch so much TV, and it's because our desires are shaped in that way. So, thankfully, you don't have to be the victim of your environment, you can also be the architect of it. You can decide to design something to make your good behaviors easier and your bad behaviors harder. So, when it comes to habits, if you want to practice your guitar more frequently, put it right in the middle of your living room so you run across it all the time. If you want to read more, when you make your bed in the morning, take the book you want to read, put it on top of the pillow. When you come back that night, pick it up, read a few pages, go to sleep. For me, I used to buy apples all the time, and then I would put them in the crisper at the bottom of the fridge, and they would sit there for 3 weeks and go bad, and I'd finally open it up and see them again and get mad. And then eventually, I bought a bowl and put it right in the middle of the counter, and so then when I buy apples, I put them there, I see them every day, and now I eat them all the time. Many of our desires are simply shaped because we have an environment that shapes us in that way. So the moral of the story is I've never seen someone stick to positive habits in a consistent fashion in a negative environment. Maybe you can overpower it once or twice, maybe you can have the willpower to do the right thing on one day, but if you're constantly fighting against those forces, it's going to be very hard to follow through. So don't rely on willpower and self-control. It's a lot easier to stick to better habits when you're presented with better options. All right, so what does this mean for writing? So, one, I leave my phone in the other room, which it is in the other room right now because I'd like to show it to you, so that's kind of a pain. But I also, on my home screen, have no applications. So you can't see anything. I have to swipe over and then tap into certain folders to get to social media. It takes at least 3 clicks for me to get to any social media app. It's not that big of a deal, but it just prevents me from being mindless and just pulling it up and tapping on Instagram because it's right in front of me. And then I also started something this last year, which has been really effective. Every Monday, my assistant will log me out of all social media and reset the passwords, and then not give them to me until Friday. And then on Friday, I get the passwords and get to enjoy social media again. Also, I am going on vacation for the next 2 weeks, so if you see me posting on Tuesday, I don't want to hear about it because I'm allowed to be on there. I'm not locked out for this week, right? So the core idea here is that you want to put more steps between you and the bad behaviors and fewer steps between you and the good behaviors. And it is far easier to stick to good habits if you are living in an environment that is inclined to push you in that direction. They're X, so you can adapt it for almost anything. All right, so the 4 stages: noticing, wanting, doing, liking. Now, I'd like to close by talking about why habits are so important. And to do that, I want to share a little story about the ship of Theseus, which is this ancient Greek parable story about this ship that goes into Athens, Greece, and parks in the dock. And as it's there, it's used year after year. Some of the boards start to wear away, some of them start to go bad. And so whenever one board is bad, they take the board out and change it and put a new one in. And this process continues for 25 or 30 years until every board that is on the ship has been changed out for a new one. And philosophers for centuries have asked, is this the same boat? Is this the same thing that was there before? Is both entirely the same and entirely new? And I would say that your habits can be the same way. We often fear that in order to achieve something new, to become someone new, we have to abandon everything that we are. But in fact, that's not how it works. Change can happen plank by plank, board by board, habit by habit. And gradually, you can become someone new. With consistency and repetition, you can actually change not only your results, but actually your identity. And the reason that this is true is because the more evidence that we have for a belief, the more likely we are to believe it. So if you go to church every Sunday for 20 years, you believe that you are religious. If you study Spanish every Thursday night for 20 minutes, you believe that you are studious. The actions that you take provide evidence for who you are. And it's not that habits matter more necessarily on an individual basis. Each moment in life matters, but what ends up happening is that over the broad span of time, things that you do once or twice fade away, and things that you do time after time, day after day, week after week, accumulate the bulk of the evidence for what you believe about yourself. And so every action that you take is actually a vote for the type of person that you want to become. If you want to become someone new, then you can take a new action and begin to accumulate evidence for that identity, for that belief about yourself. And that the more votes that you cast, the more likely you are to win the election. You don't need to be unanimous. You don't have to be perfect all the time. You just need to have the body of work, right? So true change is actually not behavior change. It's not results change. It's not process change. It's identity change. The goal is not to read a book, it's to become a reader. The goal is not to write a book or write an article, it's to become a writer. The goal is not to run a marathon, it's to become a runner, to become a type of person, to develop an identity. And the way to being something or becoming someone is through doing something. So every time you sit down to write, every time you practice that habit, you are being a writer. Every time you play a sport, you're being an athlete. Every time you practice painting or music or whatever, you are being an artist. Your identity emerges out of the habits that you have. And so here's the secret to this talk. It's not just about getting you to make small changes. It's not just about putting a book on your pillow or putting an apple on the counter. It's actually about getting you to believe something new about yourself, something possible about yourself. And habits are not only the method through which we achieve external measures of success, like losing weight or earning more money or meditating and reducing stress. They are also the path through which we achieve internal change and actually become someone new. They're the path through which we forge the identity that we have, the deepest beliefs we have about ourselves, our sense of self. And so if you can change your habits, you can change your life. Thank you.